Defnyddir yr iaith Gymraeg trwy gydol y traethawd hir hwn, lle perfformir safle diwylliannol, sylfaen hanesyddol a mynegiant hunaniaeth. Cedwir y Saesneg, lle mae angen darl damcaniaethol fanwl gywir. Mae Cymru wedi bodoli erioed rhwng enwau. Mae'r gair Anglo-Sacsonaidd welas yn cyfieithu i dramorwyr neu ddieithraid, term a osodir o'r tu allan sy'n diffinio pobl trwy wahaniaeth. Mewn cyferbyniad, mae Cymru yn tarddu o combrogi, sy'n golygu cydwladwyr, gair sydd wedi wreiddio mewn perthyn a hunaniaeth gyfunol. O'i fframio ieithyddol cynharaf, mae Cymru wedi gosod ar yr un pryd fel yr un arall a hunan ddiffiniedig. Mae'r tensiwn hwn rhwng gwahaniaethu a pherthyn wedi ei chynnal a'i atgynhyrchu trwy gynrychiolaeth diwylliannol, yn enwedig ar y sgrin. Kellner and Durham argue how media culture today are of central importance to the maintenance and reproduction of contemporary societies, and television as a form of media offers patterns of proper and improper behaviour, moral messages and ideological conditioning. Television is therefore not a neutral medium, but a cultural system through which meaning is produced, circulated and contested. Consequently, the representational patterns embedded within television drama function as mechanisms of cultural power, influencing whose identities are normalised, whose are marginalised, and whose narratives are permitted narrative legitimacy. Drawing on Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding theory, this essay understands television drama as a site where national identity is encoded by institutions and decoded by audiences through social, linguistic and ideological frameworks. Meaning is therefore not fixed at the point of production, but shaped through interpretation. Yn drama deledu Brydeinig, mae hunaniaeth Gymreig yn aml wedi cael ei gwthio i'r cyrion, ei symleiddio neu'n droi'n gomig. Mae'r traethawd fideo hwn yn archwilio sut mae Cymreictod wedi ei cyfleu, ei drafod a'i wrthwynebu ar y sgrin, o Wawdlun I Awdurdod diwylliannol, gan ofyn sut mae drama deledu cyfoes Cymraeg yn adnennill pŵer cynrychioliadol, yn gynyddol ac yn ailddiffynio'r hyn y mae Cymru'n ei olygu mewn tirwedd gyfryngol. Nad oedd darlledu yng Nghymru erioed yn niwtral ymwleidyddol. O ddarllediadau Cymraeg cyntaf y BBEC yn yr 1920au, gosodwyd cynulleidfaoedd Cymreig fel ôl ystyriaeth rhanbarthol o fewn system a oedd yn canolbwyntio ar Loegr. I rhanbarth Gymreig ar wahân ddod i'r amlwg yn yr 1930au, dim ond yn 1964 y sefydlwyd BBC Cymru Wales yn ffurfiol, yn dilyn pwysau parhaus I wahanu gwasanaethau Cymraeg oddi wrth wasanaethau rhanbarthol Lloegr. By'r foment hon yn nodi symudiad o hwylistod I gydnabyddiaeth diwylliannol, gan ganiatáu I raglenni Cymraeg ymddangos yn ystod oriau gwylio brig, yn hytrach nag ar yr ymylon. Fodd bynnag, ni ddaeth cydnabyddiaeth sefydliadol heb wrthdaro. Dwysaodd yr ymgyrch dros sianel Cymraeg pwrpasol drwy gydol yr 1970au, gan arwain at streic newyn danfygythiad gan Gwynfor Evans, a ddatgelodd papurau cabinet archifol yn ddiweddarach a oedd wedi rhoi'r llywodraeth am bwysau gwleidyddol sylweddol. Felly, nid anrheg diwylliannol oedd lansiad S4C yn 1982, ond buddugoliaeth wleidyddol sy'n ymgorffori darlledu Cymraeg o fewn rwymedigaethau gwasanaeth cyhoeddus. Mae'r frwydr darlledu hon yn adlewyrchu hanes cyfreithiol ehangach Cymru, lle gafodd y Gymraeg ei eithro'n systematig o'r bywyd cyhoeddus, nes I ddigwyddiadau ddeddfwriaethol ar ddiwedd yr 20fed ganrif rhoi statws cyfartal i'r Gymraeg a'r i'r Saesneg. Heddiw, mae safonau'r Gymraeg yn berthnasol yn fwyaf uniongyrchol I sefydliadau fel y BBEC a S4C, gan osod drama deledu fel un o'r safleoedd mwyaf pwerus y gellir mynnu awdurdod diwylliannol Cymreig, yn hytrach na'i wthio i'r cyrion. Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding provides a useful framework for analysing how Welsh culture and identity are represented in TV drama, and how audience interpret these messages. He states how these processes are not identical, but they are related, as public broadcasters like S4C or the BBC often encode programmes with cultural and political values, including language and national identity, but audiences may decode them differently depending on linguistic ability, cultural background, or political perspective. Hall stresses that there is no necessary correspondence between encoding and decoding, meaning audience may accept, negotiate or resist these meanings depending on their social positions. Hall's encoding process is often discussed abstractly, but in Welsh television drama, it is deeply material and shaped by finance, commissioners, and linguistic politics. This becomes clear through my primary research conducted for this project. In an interview I conducted with the executive producer of Hinterland, Ed Thomas, he states how
London commissioners didn't buy the Welsh thing at all.
This resistance reveals encoding as not a neutral creativity, but as a negotiation with cultural power.
We weren't completely invisible. O'n I moyn neud bod y gallu bod yn really lleol a really ryngwladol ar yr un pryd, so no compromise.
Hall identifies 3 decoding positions. In a dominant hegemonic reading, audiences accept the producer's intended meaning full and straight. For example, Welsh-speaking audiences watching a Gwyll or Hinterland would celebrate the authentic depiction of language, landscape, and socio-political issues. A negotiated reading happens when genre familiarity enables access, even as cultural specificity recedes, meaning that audiences probably understand quite adequately what has been dominantly defined, but will reinterpret aspects based on personal experiences. Bilingual or English versions of dramas like Keeping Faith or Hidden appeal broadly across the UK. Non-Welsh speakers relate to social issues and crime narratives, but may miss deeper linguistic or cultural nuances. An oppositional reading occurs when audiences understand the encoded message but detotalises the message in the preferred code in order to retotalize the message within some alternate framework of reference. International viewers of Hinterland or culturally specific programmes like The Way may see Welsh identity as exotic or dark Celtic, appreciating the noir style but misinterpreting cultural or political layers. This duality allows Welsh television to expand globally while maintaining cultural specificity. However, strong encoding within Welsh television drama stands in contrast to the treatment of Welsh identity within mainstream UK productions. Doctor Who, which was filmed in Cardiff, rarely shows explicitly Welsh identity, with most characters adopting neutral accents. Mr. Burton, a biopic about Richard Burton, cast only 2 Welsh actors in minor roles, despite Burton's Welsh origins, missing a chance to showcase Welsh talent. Sex Education, filmed also entirely in Wales, largely sidelines Welsh actors in leading roles, relegating them to extras or stereotypical minor parts. Together, these examples highlight how the encoding and decoding theory illuminates both successes and gaps in representing Welsh identity. Even when programmes are produced in Wales, encoding may intend authenticity, but audience interpretation and broader UK and international production practices often obscure Welshness. Understanding this allows creators to strategise for more accurate and inclusive representation, bridging cultural visibility with wider audience engagement. Ers blynyddoedd lawer, mae cymeriadau Cymreig ym myd teledu Prydeinig wedi ei fframio drwy gomedi yn hytrach na chymreictod. Enghraifft glir yw Little Britain, lle'r unig ymeriad amlwg Cymreig yw Dafydd,
The only gay in the village.
lle mae'r gam sillafu a'r gam ynganiad o'r enw Cymraeg Dafydd a'r unwaith yn arwydd o anirwedd diwylliannol.
Gay rights now!
Dafydd is encoded as a comic exaggeration of marginalised identity, defined almost entirely by his sexuality and a desire to be oppressed, even when exclusion is absent.
Oh no, I couldn't possibly get on the bus. I'm gay, you see.
Welshness is therefore presented as comic excess, replacing emotional depth with caricature through exaggerated accent, eccentric behaviour and social awkwardness that align with long-standing Welsh stereotypes in early 2000s British comedy. At the time of broadcast, many British audiences likely adopted a dominant reading of Dafydd, accepting the humour without questioning its cultural implications. The commercial success of Little Britain, driven by high viewership and box set sales, encouraged producers to continue encoding similar Welsh stereotypes across other programmes, reinforcing their circulation. O ganlyniad, mae cymeriadau Cymreig yn aml wedi I diraddio I fan rolau a ddiffinir gan acen a lleoliad yn hytrach na phwysigrwydd narratif.
Use the sight.
It's not right, sir.
Find the old lady, or you're dismissed.
Gyda'r acen Cymraeg yn cael ei chysylltu'n diwylliannol a hiwmor a diffyg difrifoldeb.
If it weren't for my relationship with John Prescott, I'd still be in that jail right now.
Mae'r cysylltiad hwn wedi cyfyngu ar y defnydd o leoliadau Cymraeg mewn drama gonfensiynol, oni bai bod straeon wedi fframio'n benodol o amgylch caledu neu wahaniaeth rhanbarthol. Contemporary audiences, however, are more likely to adopt an oppositional reading, recognising the cumulative harm of repeated stereotyping. Mae'r newid hon wedi cyfrannu at y galw cynyddol am leisiau Cymraeg dilys mewn drama teledu trwy gydol y 2010au, gan arwain at gymeriadau wedi'u seilio fel Tom Mathias, Faith Howells a Dee Driscoll, sy'n ragflaenu realaeth cymdeithasol dros Wawdlun ac yn caniatáu i hunaniaeth Cymraeg fodoli ar y sgrin heb gael ei fframio fel rhywbeth doniol. Hall argues in his chapter, The Spectacle of the Other, difference matters because it is essential to meaning. Without it, meaning could not exist. As difference is central to meaning, but is often organised through unequal binaries that position one identity as dominant and other as marginal. Daffod's exaggerated Welshness and sexuality are defined in opposition to what is presented as normal British identity, reducing complex cultural identities into a simplistic and unequal binary for comic effect. From a media power perspective, Little Britain emerged from a London-centric production culture in which Welsh people had limited control over their own representation, illustrating how dominant cultural groups shape minority identities through easily recognisable stereotypes that appear naturalised, while realist drama has been slower to challenge and to correct these portrayals. Tra bod Little Britain yn cynrychioli ffurf amlwg a hynod weladwy o Wawdlun Cymreig, nid yw comedia Prydeinig ddiweddarach wedi datgymalu'r rhesymau cynrychioliadol hon gymaint a'i mireinio. Mae'r newid hwn yn amlwg yn Gavin Stacey, sy'n ymddangos fel pe bain symud Cymreictod oddi wrth y watwawr amlwg drwy ei wreiddio o fewn fformat comedi sefyllfa romantus, sy'n gosod hunaniaethau Cymraeg a Saesneg ochr yn ochr.
Uncle Brian? Brian? Bryn.
It means hill in Welsh.
Does it really?
As Parent argues in Now Say Something in Welsh, Gavin Stacey in translation, the series negotiates Welsh identity through a balance of ordinariness and difference, presenting Welsh characters as familiar and domestic while simultaneously marking them as culturally distinct.
Where to she now?
Right, either speak English or learn Welsh, because where to she... Do you mean where is she now?
Yeah.
Say that then.
This balance lends Welshness greater warmth and narrative presence rather than earlier characters such as Little Britain, integrating it into everyday family and romantic relationships rather than isolating it for ridicule. However, when examined through Hall's encoding and decoding framework, this apparent progression reflects a softening of stereotype rather than its removal. English characters continue to be encoded as culturally neutral and internally complex, while Welsh identity remains highly visible and marked through accent, emotional expressiveness and behavioural excess. As a result, ordinariness operates unevenly as the Englishness is treated as the default, while Welshness becomes ordinary only through its ongoing differentiation. This dynamic reflects an England-centric media landscape in which English identities are represented from the inside, while Welsh identities are constructed from the outside for a mainstream audience. Yn y modd hwn, mae Gavin Stacey yn dangos sut y gall comedi teledu Prydeinig bontio o Wawdlun agored i symleiddio serchog, gan gynnal strwythurau cynrychioliadol anghyfartal trwy gwneud Cymreictod yn weladwy, yn nodedig ac yn ddigrif, hyd yn oed wrth iddo ddod yn fwy derbyniol, yn ddiwylliannol ac yn fasnachol llwyddiannus.
Hello, Dino. Welcome to Barry.
Shemai, Dino dwi, a dwi'n hapus iawn bod yma in Barry.
Sorry, but I don't...
Gwen, wait a minute. What are you doing? I've been learning Welsh. I did an intensive course because I knew we were coming down. I wanted to understand what everyone was saying. Wow. What? No one speaks Welsh.
Well, no, that's not
Gwen,
stupid.
please don't make it more complicated than it already is, okay? Listen, Dino.
Welsh-speaking audiences may adopt an oppositional reading, recognising that while the series celebrates Welsh warmth and community, it continues to grant English characters narrative complexity without subjecting their identity to the same level of scrutiny. Ultimately, Gavin Stacey functions less as a challenge to dominant representational norms, and more as a subtle reinforcement of them, reproducing an unequal framework in which English identity remains culturally invisible, while Welshness is simplified and exaggerating, reinforcing long-standing power imbalances within British television. Os yw comedi Prydeinig yn hanesyddol wedi fframio Cymreictod trwy hiwmor, mae y Gwyll a'i chymarddwyieithog Hinterland yn nodi'r pwynt lle mae drama dyledu Cymraeg yn adennill difrifoldeb y narratif ac awdurdod diwylliannol. Mae'r cyfresu hyn yn arddangos Cymreictod trwy iaith, lleoliad, hanes, a'r tensiwn rhwng traddodiad a moderniniaeth, gan cyflwyno Cymru fel un sy'n gyfoethog yn diwylliannol, yn atmospheric ac yn narratif cymleth yn hytrach na chomeg.
By Sydney Vosper. The devil's face is said to be hidden in the folds of the Welsh lady's shawl.
Mae'r fframwaith trosedd arddull, Nwadig Nwa, yn gosod hunaniaeth Cymreig yng nghanol drama ddifrifol, gan ddilysu'r iaith Gymraeg a'r dirwedd fel rhywbeth cynhenid ystyrlon.
Dierys? Cysylltwch â traffig. Dim sôn am Miss Jenkins na'i char.
I wneud number one, i wneud yn sewr bod ni'n credu bod y fersiwn Cymraeg yn coherent i ni, okay? A ddim yn laughable, ti'n bod?
Mae'r mymryn hwn yn gwrthwynebu'n uniongyrchol y fframio comeg o Cymreictod a welwyd mewn teledu Prydeinig cynharach, gan ail-leoli'r iaith yn narratif o ddifri. Lle roedd Cymreictod ar un adeg yn gweithredu fel rwystyr, mae Hinterland yn ei chyfleu fel seilwaith. Ategir y pwyslais hwn ar ffurf yn hytrach nag arddangosiad, pan egluro Thomas.
Wnaethon ni wneud y tirwedd fel cymeriad. So the landscape dictated the pace and everything.
Mae hyn wedi trawsnewid daearyddiaeth Cymru o leoliad I awdurdod narratif gan wreiddio ystyr diwylliannol I ffurf yn hytrach na mynegiant.
They baptized her in the way that they did at the time and named her Blodeuwedd. There's another reading to the Blodeuwedd myth, isn't there, Mr. Rees? It's not all virgins and flowers. She seduced me. You were her teacher.
Fodd bynnag, nid yw'r ystyr hyn wedi ei osod yn sefydlog, ond yn dibynnu ar sut y caiff y testunau hyn ei ddehongli. Hall's encoding and decoding again illuminates how this works. He states how the codes of encoding and decoding may not be perfectly symmetrical, as producers have embedded multiple levels of meaning in a gwyll. However, audiences will decode them differently depending on linguistic ability and cultural position. For Welsh-speaking audiences, a gwyll affirms cultural recognition, encoding emotional nuance, social hierarchy, and linguistic authority. For non-Welsh-speaking viewers, the programme may foreground Wales as mysterious or exotic, with crime conventions guiding comprehension. The bilingual production amplifies this polysemy, as the English and Welsh versions offer distinct interpretive experiences. Parents note how Gavin Stacey balances ordinariness and difference, and a Gwyll extends this principle into drama, negotiating local specificity with global accessibility. Despite this, oppositional readings are still possible, as some audiences may decode the focus on isolation, secrecy, and violence as morally constrained or peripheral, echoing earlier stereotypes of otherness. However, when placed in the context of global crime drama conventions, with programs like Death in Paradise, whose setting is encoded as bright and warm yet filled with crime, these narrative choices can be understood as genre-driven rather than culturally reductive.
The local is the universal. I think is a love letter to a disappearing world.
Hall's claim that meaning is completed by audiences becomes productive here, as the more culturally specific the encoding, the wider its possible decoding. A Gwyll ultimately exemplifies Hall's assertion that meaning is never fixed, but here that instability operates as a strength rather than a weakness.
Byddwn ni ffili ffordd o wneud e, dim ond yn Gymraeg, ac byddwn ni ffili cael yr arian I wneud e.
States Thomas, highlighting how bilingualism becomes a survival strategy that paradoxically allows minority drama to exist at scale without diluting identity. At this point, the interview begins to move beyond questions of meaning and towards the conditions that make meaning possible. The interview reveals that encoding is not simply ideological, but infrastructural. Decisions about language, landscape, and tone are inseparable from funding models, commissioning hierarchies, and global markets.
O'n nhw'n really nervous about the alienato'i co-audience nhw. Nath y BBX sylweddoli bod na appreciation o'r version Cymraeg.
Centering Welsh identity and language as authoritative and narratively central, bilingual dramas demonstrate how minority language storytelling can assert cultural power, gain international recognition, and allow multiple audience readings without diluting local specificity, even when mediated by large institutions like the BBC and Netflix. Gallai hyn ysbrydoli cynhyrchiadau'r dyfodol I greu arlliwiau emosiynol gwahanol, naws ideolegol a pherthynas a lle a chymuned, gan ganiatáu i'r fersiynau Cymraeg o'r rhaglenni hyn nid yn unig fod yn gyfieithiad, ond yn wrthrych artistig amlwg ynddynt yn ei hunan. Yn hytrach na gweld niwtraliaeth neu gyffredinolrwydd, mae y gwell yn dangos sut gall drama iaith leiafrifol gyflawni cylchrediad byd-eang yn union trwy phenedoldeb. Mae'r athroniaeth hon yn saili uchelgais diwylliannol ehangach y gyfres. Fel y dadleuai Thomas.
Ni'n gwlad fach, sy'n mynd i efelychu beth mae'r brawd mawr yn neud yn awful.
Nid yw drama gyfoes Cymraeg yn ceisio niwtraliaeth nad yn wared, ond hyder a derbyn gwahaniaeth, ymryson a risg fel amodau goroesiad diwylliannol. Nid yn unig y mae damcaniaeth Hall yn ein helpu i ddadansoddi sut mae drama deledu Cymraeg wedi cynrychioli hunaniaeth yn y gorffennol, mae hefyd yn helpu ni deall i ble mae'n mynd. Mae'n symud sylw oddi wrth yr hyn y mae dramau hyn yn ei ddweud a thuag at sut mae'r ystyr yn cael ei lunio, ei herio a'i ddehongli gan wahanol gynulleidfaoedd. Mae The Way yn cynrychioli moment arwyddocaol yn y datblygiad hwn. Wedi ei ddisgrifio gan Michael Sheen fel the prism of real people told with warmth and humanity, bringing the everyday and the extraordinary together. Mae The Way yn ragflaenu gwrthdaro gwleidyddol cyfoes a gweithredu ar y cyd, yn wahanol i ddramau Cymraeg gynharach a oedd yn honni cyfreithlondeb diwylliannol trwy awyrgylch neu gonfensiwn genre. Fel cynhyrchiad BBC Cymru Wales, mae'n gweithredu o fewn gwerthoedd darlledu gwasanaeth cyhoeddus, ond mewn ffordd sy'n anarferol o wrthdrawiol.
We always just lurch, don't we? People like us, places like this. The fate of the steelworks is forever in the balance. This week, next week, we're constantly on edge. Grateful for any tiny reprieve. But the next threat always comes, and it's exhausting.
Mae hunaniaeth Cymreig yma wedi ei ddangos trwy realaeth wleidyddol, brwydr dosbarth a beirniadaeth amlwg o Awdurdod, gan gyflwyno Cymru nid fel ymylol neu ddigrif, ond fel un wleidyddol ymwybodol ac wedi ei rannu'n gymdeithasol drwy ei phobl. Through Hall's framework, it becomes clear that The Way anticipates contested readings and does not attempt to smooth them out. Some audiences may decode the series as anti-police or politically biased, dismissing it as overly ideological. Others may adopt dominant or negotiated readings that recognise the depiction of working-class marginalisation, deindustrialisation and protest as both authentic and historically grounded. Rather than avoiding these divisions, The Way embraces them, positioning debate itself as part of its cultural function.
You're them? It's bloody them, the ones who started the riot.
They didn't bloody start it, we did. Workers' uprising and proud.
The series also adopts stylistic elements associated with postmodern television drama, including moral ambiguity, fragmented narrative, and multiple perspectives. These techniques deliberately increase polysemy, reinforcing Hall's no necessary correspondence argument of how meaning is not fixed at the point of production, but is actively created through decoding. Viewers are not instructed how to feel or who to side with, and this uncertainty encourages critical engagement rather than passive consumption. Gyda'i gilydd, mae The Way yn arwydd o symudiad ehangach mewn dramau teledu Cymraeg, I ffwrdd oddi wrth ofal cynrychioliadol a thuag at hyder ideolegol.
I can see it now. Where I'm going. Back where I started. But it's not some lame old story. Don't need them anymore. This is a new story. A really brilliant new story.
Trwy wreiddio profiadau sy'n benodol I ddiwylliant ar anbarthau o fewn naratif gwleidyddol adnabyddiadau yn fyd eang, mae'n dangos sut y gall drama Gymraeg parhau a'i gwreiddiau'n ddwfn yn dal yn hygyrch I gynulleidfaoedd rhyngwladol. In accepting negotiated and oppositional readings as inevitable, contemporary Welsh television drama increasingly positions itself as a site of challenge rather than comfort, expanding what Welsh representation can achieve on screen. I gloi, mae drama teledu Cymraeg wedi symud o Wawdlun a thirweddau cymharol I cymeriadau a naratif sy'n hawlio awdurdod diwylliannol. o hiwmor stereoteipio I gynhesrwydd cymesur ac yn y pen draw I naratifau difrifol a ddwyieithog, mae hunaniaeth Cymreig ar y sgrin wedi cael ei ddatblygu gyda dyfnder, penodolrwydd a phwysigrwydd ideolegol. Drwy ganolbwyntio'r iaith, tirwedd a chyd-destun cymdeithasol Cymru, mae'r rhaglenni hyn yn cadarnhau pŵer diwylliannol straeon iaith leiafrifol, tra'n aros yn hygyrch I gynulleidfaoedd ehangach. Yn y pen draw, mae'r llwybr hwn yn dangos y gall drama Cymraeg fod yn sefydlog yn ei diwylliant ac ar yr un pryd cyrraedd cynulleidfaoedd rhyngwladol. Trwy dderbyn dehongliadau amrywiol a gwrthdaro posib, mae drama cyfoes Cymru'n trawsnewid y sgrin yn le lle nad yw hunaniaeth genedlaethol yn joc, ond yn fan awdurdod, cymhlethdod a thrafodaeth barhaus.